are live. So Lou, I'll turn it over to you to start the content weaving here.
Yeah, as I was saying, what a day. I don't know how we topped day one, but this was unbelievable. I'd like to go back and forth with you just with some thoughts or some captures. And I tell you, when Bob started off with John Santelli, I have so many takeaways. But I think one of the big things I pulled there is he looked at the pandemic as a disruption, I think, as we all do. But the way it's really impacted, or the way he put it, triggered data sharing. Mm-hmm. When you think about one of the barriers in healthcare, the privacy regulations, so I think he sees that. And then the whole consumerization of health. He talked about the whole idea of the payer and the provider playing ping pong and the interoperability. And you could see his vision beyond that and where we're trying to go with this. The real-time healthcare, I thought was very interesting. What did you hear from him, or what would cover your thoughts?
I love that. I also just love what I thought was very grounded perspective on telehealth, right? Like we've experienced this in our portfolio. Like it's a great time to be in the telehealth space, right? And you've just seen this explosion of interest in it. But I thought he had great perspective on sort of not just the right now, but even whenever it happens. And he put all the caveats around whenever it happens. But as we start to trend towards back to normal, how telehealth is still going to be important, just given the backlog of healthcare that needs to be solved. The other thing I thought that was great, and I would say it came out in the conversation with Bob and John, I think it also just sort of weaved through the whole day, was some of the people elements of this, which I thought was yesterday and today. And I'm just, that's really encouraging to me, because I think this is just an important topic for us to be continuing to focus on. So whether it was John at the beginning of the day, or both Bill and Estella calling it out later in the day, and then when you thought about both the CVC panel and the first customer program, a lot of this is just about the people and getting the people to work effectively together, collaborate. How do you find the right people? And just a lot of that just made me really excited for our conversation next Tuesday afternoon, kind of the second half of next Tuesday.
Yeah, I think it was definitely a red thread through a lot of what we're talking about. A couple other thoughts from John before we talk about the customer first panel and stuff. Just his insights on the PCP and primary care and the change there. What is primary care? The acquisitions they made with MedExpress and things like that. And then I think he took a big pivot when he went into talking about the next crisis. The next crisis beyond COVID is the behavioral health client. Yeah. And I think he was really great the way he worked that into your question on AI. And I think we're all very sensitive to AI and chatbots and what's doing on the administrative side to help lower that cost. But I was really impressed with his confidence and the ability on the clinical side. And really to the point where what I was hearing is we can predict the diseases. The hard part is, what do we do with it? How do we intervene? Yeah. We can predict his heart example. We can predict 3 to 6 months. What do we tell the patient? It's sort of like genomics and genetics. Or what's the doctor's going to say? What do I do? I love the diagnostic. Now give me the protocol. So I just thought it was an unbelievable, great way to start the day. And I think, as you've shared with us before, when you look at where is transformation going to have major impact, obviously healthcare, and then I think you talk about fintech also. But then we went over to Neil's panel, and I think, it was so great. As you said, Neil wrote the book. What was a couple of your takeaways from there? I mean, he had a great panel, J&J, Bayer, Phillips. What did you get out of there?
I mean, I love that conversation. It's an area that I'm super passionate about, as you know. I think that if I was going to point one thing from that panel that I'd encourage you to remember, it was what Mary Beth said, right? If you're doing a first customer program, you need to pay the startups for that customer relationship. They're not on the panel because I have editorial control, so I didn't invite them to the panel. But the number of these companies who want to start just to quote unquote donate their time, or even in a couple of just ridiculous examples, want the startups to pay them for the right to work with them. I mean, that's just crazy. There is no way that a startup should be using their resources to pay for the work that's being done there. If you can't come up with something as a corporate that's valuable enough for you to write a check, then you need to keep thinking. Now, that doesn't mean you need to pay market. It doesn't mean that you need to pay what you'd pay Oracle or Microsoft for that solution. It's less about the dollars and it's more just about showing the startup company that, hey, you value what they're doing, that there's real revenue associated with it, there's real business case to be made. And it also, what I found looking at a bunch of these over the years is when the startups get a check and the company writes a check, the commitment from the company to that project goes up exponentially, right? And so I thought the whole thing was great. I thought how each of those three organizations have kind of productized their first customer programs was really good. But that point from Mary Beth, I just wanted to double click on because I think it's so important.
Yeah, and then if you bring the people part in, I mean, we heard some of that from Bill Gals also.
Yeah.
Motivation of the team and the charter and the focus, and it's about the people. A couple other things that really jumped out at me on the panels. And we heard this yesterday with Alex Marshall and the Discovery Assistance when they were talking about J&J and the assets they have, access to expertise, the lab space, the venture capital, but the access to the people, I think as Alex put it, the discovery assist and the ability to save those entrepreneurs time. And I thought it was nice that was reiterated there. And then, I think also there was just some basic blocking and tackling. And I think it fit in also yesterday in the discussions about founders and co-founders and how do you get them together. I think this was maybe Mary Beth also, be close early on, get to know each other early on. Maybe you could comment on that. And when you bring this oil and water together and with those conversations you have early on.
Yeah. So I think almost everybody, when they talk about this, the first words out of their mouth are like, well, I'm not an expert. I don't know a lot about it. We're still figuring this out. And to me, that's exciting, right? It means that there's opportunity to still optimize a lot of this stuff and to get better at it. So, it'll be interesting to see what we have to be close together means in a future of work where more work is done remotely, even after the crisis, I suspect. But I think what's important is some way, shape, or form building trust across these teams. And the good news is while I think not all of it is known by necessarily the startup folks, there is good information on how to build trust across teams, right? And I think that's things that we can leverage and pull into a lot of these conversations.
Yeah, it's an interesting dichotomy there in that, especially in this virtual world we're now, building trust in a virtual environment takes time. It's something we don't have. I think most of us have been sensitive to shorter virtual meetings. But how do you build trust with people you don't know from all across the world unless you engineer that in? So a lot of the coaching we've been doing is about engineering that time just for small talk. That really starts to open up larger conversations. Well, why don't we transition to something near and dear to your heart, the CVC panel? And I tell you, I think Joe and Paul and Rich really nailed it. I don't think we got Vin involved, but again, one of these things you sit back and say it's obvious, but I never thought about. Rich said, well, he said VC is powerful. Corporate VC is powerful. It creates a pull. It attracts attention and lets people know you're serious about this. So I just thought that's one of those things you don't think about a lot, is the power of corporate venture capital. What did they teach an old pro like you on this?
Well, so to me, I thought what was interesting is the fact that when you put one of those lightning rods out there, right, the fact that can inform a lot of the other things in the organization, right? So Paul talked about, the 3 different pitch days kind of across the Optum Startup Studios, a way for the executives and the startups to interact with each other. And we've been really close to Paul and his team putting that together at Carnegie Mellon, and that really is powerful. I think when Rich talked about sort of the briefing type things that they're doing at Touchdown across the dozen plus groups that they're doing joint ventures on it. And, some of this came back to the conversation with Estella as well. Like, I do think venture can be an interesting input into a lot of these kind of corporate thesis development around innovation more broadly. And I think you're not frankly seeing companies do enough of that. And I think that's something that most of the CVC groups could learn from both Paul and Rich's point. I also should just say we did try to get Vin on. We had all kinds of tech problems with him, but he was fighting the whole way through to get his connectivity to work. He's a proud CMU alum and a smart guy. I will say, if you're interested in hearing a little more about Ben, we did have him on Agile Giants, and so you can listen to his episode there. But Lou, I think we've only got a couple of minutes left, so I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, just two more comments. I'll let you close out day two. I really liked when Paul talked about the role the Optum Design Studio filled in someone that's doing as much as they do. He talked about the Optum Ventures, mainly B rounds and up. He talked about Optum Technology, but the void that the Design Studio filled and how that's working in to grab those early on ideas. I like that. And I also liked, I think, when he talked about, all startups need a big brother. And when I think about what's going on at the startup lab and the mentors and the network you've hooked up the studio folks with, I think it's a good model. So thanks for the opportunity to share some thoughts.
Thanks, Louie. Yeah, so guys, as we head to tomorrow, tomorrow is the one day that we don't start at 1 Eastern. We're starting at 4 Eastern. And the reason we're doing that, again, is we wanted to make as much of what you experienced in an in-person conference translate to this virtual conference. So we have a really fun keynote with Matt Fleckenstein from Microsoft. He leads all their augmented reality innovation. He's going to talk a little bit about his experiences. Full disclosure, Matt and I started a company together with Dave Mawhinney and one other guy. So there's some interesting connectivity back to Schwartz and CSL there. But he's going to talk about what he's doing from Microsoft. He's been a corporate entrepreneur at both Salesforce and Microsoft actually twice, as well as not just the startup Dave and I did with him, but 2 other venture-backed startups as well. He's going to kind of set the stage with his journey and then add in someone from Lockheed Martin and Case talking about how each of their organizations are using augmented reality to innovate. It should be a fun, interesting conversation. Then we're going to do a little bit of interesting kind of speed networking like the 5x5s, as well as we're having a panel that Lori Barkman's going to moderate, where she's going to have 3 students that, for those of you who've been part of the CSL in the past, are graduates of the CSL project course, talking about what they're doing now, sort of where are they now. And then, and this gets to one of the best parts of normal conferences that we're bringing into the forum, hopefully even though virtually, the last hour of the conference will be virtual networking. So it'll be like a virtual happy hour, and every few minutes we'll move you to another breakout room, and you'll get a chance to kind of meet a lot of the attendees and have an option to follow up afterwards. So, we believe that community is a key part of what CSL brings to these conversations. And as much as we can teach you things, and hopefully we're able to through the programming, we also know that you can learn from each other. And so that's really the goal of the last hour tomorrow. That'll only work if you show up. So hopefully you'll be there tomorrow for the last hour and ready to kind of interact with each other and learn from each other. So we will be back literally exactly 24 hours from now at 4 Eastern tomorrow with the keynote from Matt, and then the Lockheed Martin and Case Western follow-up from that. So we'll see you then. Thanks, everybody.